Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome. That was ridiculous. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the A10 rebuild. This is the last video, I think. At this point in my brain, this is the last video for the equipment install and getting this thing ready to fly again. We've covered a lot in this series. So hopefully you enjoyed this last video. I'm assuming we're going to get into some of the Jetty stuff and Jetty programming, but let's finish this thing up. So hang tight and we'll dive back into the A10 Black Snakes by SkyMaster. All right, so we've got our fuselage joined back together. That's the last thing we did in the last video was pull the tanks were already pulled, but get the tanks reinstalled, pulled the fuselage, put the fuselage back together. So we are in the final phases of this aircraft. Next thing we're going to do is as we've been working from the back forward, we are going to get this tray all complete. So this is pretty simple tray. I'll show you how we've already got it laid out. So this tray has two of our data relay modules, the Zykoy relay modules. All of our cables are going to loop to the circle there, and we've got our air fill and air gauge. Now, yes, we're putting a compressor in this aircraft, but if you take the aircraft to the field and you're doing your first power on of the day, it's always nice to fill this up first so your compressor's not working too much. That's my opinion anyways. So we're going to get this thing installed, which means getting a bunch of the cables run to that point. All right, so we've got our tray installed. Our turbines are labeled, all of our plugs are plugged in where they should belong, and this portion is done. So everything else now is in the forward section, which starts to get messy. So one of the first things we have to do in this forward section is we've got the tray for this area. We kind of need to figure out where all of our equipment is going. So our CB box is going on this back tray. Our new air system is going to go here in place of the crap box. And then on our front tray here that we painted, that's just going to house our batteries in this area. And then we've got some plugs we're picking up from my 3D printer, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Tomorrow. And that's basically what's going to be mounted on that portion. And then yesterday we glued in this piece, and the reason for that piece is our mount right there for that tray or that plate, and this plate is going to house our filling line, which we're going to have one valve here, they're going to come to that T, and then we're going to have our filling line come off of that T. So maybe we'll do the filling valves next, or the festo valves and all that stuff, and we need to start giving this area some thought. All right, so we got our front tray complete. Now this is our filler assembly, and I was really worried that this wouldn't work out, but fortunately here at the Lighter Side of RC we've got on our website some pretty cool little 3D printed things, and I get these all made for me locally, and it's awesome. So we've got these 6mm corners, which helps when you have a tight bend like this. And we've also got these in 4mm as well too. So this worked out perfect. We got good access from the front hatch to be able to adjust and turn these valves off, as well as fill the fuel system with that right there. So worked out good. All right, so we've got a bunch of things done here as far as the organization goes of all the equipment. So some decisions that have been made. This is the rear tray, and we've mounted our new MAP bubble trap tanks. Our Zykoy fuel pumps are up here, and what I did was make another plate that we screwed down rather than screwing these in through the bottom and having a real tough time if you ever have to get these things out. Now initially we were going to put the central box on this plate, but it didn't really work out that well, so that's where all the air stuff's going to go. Then we've got the central box here, which we've mounted to this new plate. Now this is the original plate. We just put a knife blade in there, separated the old faux carbon, put a new piece of faux carbon on there, and we've mounted our central box. I'll show you where this is going, and our Cortex as well. So the central box is now going where the old poop box was for the air system, and our Cortex fits nicely right down there. So having going through all this stuff, this actually works out really nice because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put these pieces in place. We can run all of our wiring and get that stuff done underneath the tray, which is good. This is a bit of a mess down there still. And then once this is all done, then we can actually fit this tray back in. So it actually works out systematically quite well. And that's what we're focusing on next. I've been playing around with this stuff in the front still. Drilled the holes for the compressor finally. We can't mount that until we get our new battery plugs and everything. So things are coming together as usual. It's a bit of a mess, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of sitting and thinking, and going through this whole process. All right, guys, so we're continuing our wiring and setup and stuff here. So we got these new plugs from Joe, my 3D printer guy. Thanks, Joe, for banging these off for me so quickly. So these are XT, what are they, 50 plugs? And we've got the flush mounted version, then also a raised version as well too. So I'll probably be adding these to the website. Let me know if you guys are interested. No, I don't have a file for these things because I don't do any 3D printing. And I like to support as many people in this hobby as possible, including my local guys. So that's why I get Joe to do all my 3D printing for me. So thank you, Joe, for doing that. Let me know if you guys are interested in the comments below for these plugs. And if there's enough interest, I'll add them to the website. So we're adding these to the front tray. So we've got 4 of the cutouts already done here, and we're going to have 4 batteries, of course, as we've talked about, running across there. And we're going to have to color code these because we have 2 3-cell lipos and 2 2-cell lipos for the receiver. And the 3 cells are for the turbines. So we need to make that as simple as possible. So we don't plug those into the wrong connections. So this is kind of the next thing I've been working on because we need to get all those battery leads run before we start putting the rest of this stuff inside the aircraft. So other thing we need to do is get rid of some of these connectors here in between the light controller and the battery that's going to be up front. So we've got our detail for scale light controller. They're not in business anymore, but that's the light controller that's in this plane. So we've got the wire coming forward here. So we're just going to simplify all this stuff. And we need to run a lead up to the top, somewhere up here, because we're going to have a tiny little life battery that powers the lighting system. All right, guys, not a lot of recording tonight, but we've got a lot accomplished. So here's kind of a bit of a rundown of everything that has happened. So the compressor is installed. That's just screwed down. Some of our cable clamps that I normally use, you probably can't see it, but anyways, there's some cable clamps on the underside of the fuselage. That's holding all the power wires that come forward. So we've got our fill line just kind of sitting here. This was more just for position, so we could see how that's all going to work out. And I've got our light battery plug getting glued to the side of the fuselage. That was pretty much the best spot that I can come up with. I was thinking about putting it here, there, but everything kind of just interfered with it. So this was really the best spot. Now, with the spacing of the batteries, I think we've got enough room to put our little life battery that we're going to use in with the other batteries. So I think they're all going to fit in this area. Now, as I mentioned, we're using the 3D printed XT60 battery plugs. When we've color coded these as well too. So I used yellow plugs and yellow housings, or painted them yellow, for our RX plugs. This plug here we've got paired up with our turbine and our compressor. The last plug is our left turbine, and that's just the turbine, not the compressor. So that's the layout right there, and then of course our light batteries on the side. So the tray is pretty much installed permanently unless we really need to take it out, which would be not a lot of fun. But we've got everything run underneath that we need to. So that part is done. The front end is pretty much complete. And if we do need to add any nose weight, we can just undo the front tray here and pop some nose weight underneath that area. So that's no problem at all. And so that part's done. We rewired a bit of the light system, installed the power plugs onto the central box. Now I did these sideways, as you can see, not coming straight off the central box. Reason for that is when our cockpit sits in here, we're not super tight for room, but as we get close to this front former, it's a little bit tighter, but the cockpit kind of comes like this, so it won't interfere with anything else. But I wanted to make sure that we wouldn't have any issues there, so we just routed those sideways, and I put a bit of goop on the exposed leads to cover it all up. So that part's done. So really the kind of the last thing to do here, and I probably have said this a couple times, but a lot of our organizing and stuff, everything's got a position now on the front end. So that's pretty much good to go. Kind of the last big thing is going to be our rear tray. Now, in order to put that rear tray in, that's where all the airlines and everything are going to come through. So there's quite a bit of organization that goes to that. And it's just been a matter of making sure that we've got all of our leads and all that kind of stuff in place so everything can be installed. This line here is our compressor line. So as I've mentioned in other builds, we have our compressor sitting there. We've got our Teflon line coming off the compressor. Then there's a one-way valve, a Festo valve coming off the compressor, and then it goes into a normal 4mm Festo line or poly line. And then this gets reduced to 3mm. I just left this long so we'd have plenty to play with. So that's pretty much it tonight. And next big steps, of course, as I've mentioned, are all of that main tray, which is this tray right here. So that's the last thing to really kind of get organized and think about. So next step, this guy. All right, guys, we are back from our event on the weekend and we are wrapping up the Black Snake's A10. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a tip time here, and this tip time, of course, is brought to you by Trusty Bent Screwdriver. Okay, so this tip time is kind of revolves around what we're doing on the plane right now. So right now we're working on the air system. So with the air system, we've got our Zycoi sequencer, and we've got our Zycoi valves and all that stuff to deal with the gear system on this aircraft. So we've got our stuff kind of sitting over here. We've got the plane sitting over there. Receivers already installed. And right now our jetty box is powered on. We've got a 3-cell LiPo powered in there, reduced to 8.4 volts. So rather than having all this stuff kind of in the plane, balanced on a table beside the plane, this is one thing that I always keep handy in the shop, and that is a long, really long, like 6 to 10 feet long. I usually have a couple of these actually. 6 to 10 foot long servo connector. And this is super simple to deal with in any situation. And if you're using the power box stuff, what I like to do is if you're needing a male-to-male connector, I just insert this in the end of the connector, and then we've got the ability to plug in another male, just making sure that polarity is correct. So in this case, I want to get the gear controller set up, so I'm going to plug this into the gear channel, come over here, plug that into the controller, and then we can go and get all of our programming set up and ready to go. All right, so we've got our main tray here ready to get installed. So pretty straightforward. We've got all of our airline system for the gear and the brakes teed in here. This is where the supply is going to come up to. And you can see that I've tie wired all of the 4-way and 3-way connectors. Reason for that is these little metal connectors, they're okay, but it's a nice little bit of insurance. Unlike on the valves here where you've got a nice double barb, they grab the lines really well. So that's why I've wire tied all those guys. The fuel system's all ready to go. We've put our fill lines on here. So the rest of the stuff we need to connect is we need to connect our 8mm lines coming from the tank, and those go to each of the UATs. And then our lines right here are going to go back to feed the turbine. And then all of our air lines are going to come up through the center, and they're all going to be distributed to the different locations based on what needs to happen. So this is essentially ready to go in the aircraft, and there'll be a couple other little telemetry things to go on here, the turbine telemetries and stuff like that. So anyways, I think we are ready to pop this in the plane. All right, guys, we've made some good progress here. We've got the tray all installed. All of our airlines are all connected, so that portion is now complete. So our tray is fastened down, done, unless we have an issue with something. That is its new home. So next thing to do is start running some of these wires and things like that. Again, I want to work backwards to forwards. So I'm going to start running things like our tank lines going to the UATs. We're going to run our fuel lines going to the fuel pump. I've already run the fill lines. There's actually a nice little gap here between the former and the lock system. So the lock system still works perfectly, but the 6 mil fill line tucks in nicely right there. So that worked out great. So that's what we're doing. We're going to work on the tubing, and then we've got our turbine lines here to deal with as well too. So those are going to be things like the pump and things like that. So anyways, I'm going to get that stuff organized, and pretty straightforward, nothing special to show. You want to leave a little bit of extra line in case this tray does need to come out and we need to cut that off. You want to be able to use this same line. So leaving a little bit excess is definitely not a bad thing. So keep that in mind if you're working on something similar. And this is next. All right, guys, so we've done a few things here. We've gotten all the turbine stuff laid out. We've also got our telemetry units, our Zycoid telemetry units. You can see this one's flashing kind of funky. That one's solid right now. This one is active. This one is not active. So the left turbine doesn't have a battery plugged in, so it keeps saying check connection. This turbine, we've already programmed our throttle settings and we've got a battery plugged in. So all we had to do on this, like when we tested the Zycoid 180, is plug in the module. We've got our right turbine going into E1 here on the receiver on the central box. And when we come to our jetty here, I'll show you how to get into there. So timers and sensors. Oops. Timers and sensors. Sensor logging setup. And I changed this to say turbine right, but you can see all the different parameters there. And we've also got our V-speak and all that kind of stuff. So that just showed up there. And what we'll do is we'll program the other turbine now, the left turbine. And what we're going to do is we'll just plug the battery into the other turbine outlet. And we'll do exactly the same thing on the other turbine and get the throttle set up. And we'll get our telemetry unit plugged in. All right, guys, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the servo leads into the central box 310. Now, before we do that, we're going to put the wings on the aircraft, and that's primarily so we can confirm that we're plugging them into the right spot. So that's the next thing we're going to do there. For the most part, they're all labeled and our ends are already on. We did that already, so that is good to go. And just a little jetty tip here for you. This is probably pretty basic knowledge, but if you push the menu button and then you push the little servo I, so function number 2, this brings you to the receiver outputs. And then if you push the little circle thing there in the center, so function button number 3, that gives you the rundown of all the different outputs. So throttle number 1 is in output number 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So little master menu there for you. All right, so we've got the pylons all installed on the wings. Of course, the wings are installed as well. And we've got the center pylons installed on the fuselage, so that portion is all done. It was quite simple because we had everything marked from when we took them off to paint them. So next thing to do is we are going to do a try on the gear and see how things go. I filled this up last night to 100 psi, and we're still holding at 100 psi, so that's a good sign. And what we want to do now is plug in the compressor, plug in the central box, and we'll do some gear cycles here and see what happens. All right, guys, as the instructions on the valve say, it's pretty darn simple to change this to be pressurized when it's powered on. So what happens with these valves is they turn on with no pressure going into the system, and I think that's to save air pressure. But we want the pressure to go out of the valve based on the condition we're telling it. So we've programmed the limits, showed you that last little clip, and then all you do when the valves are on is you just push the button on the valve one time, and that changes the mode to be pressurized when power on. So now we've got our radio turned on. We've got, probably have our compressor kick on here, but we'll power the system up with gear down. And we'll flick our gear switch. Beautiful. And gear condition down. So front door opens, locks come off the main wheels, and both gear comes down. And here's a shot of it going up without the compressor on. All right, so we've got all of our surfaces plugged in. We did some basic setup on everything, and our travels are all set up as per the manual. The only travel that I reduced a little bit is the aileron travel. They call for 35 to 40 millimeters, and it's way too much on this plane. It's very oversensitive, so we knocked the aileron travel down a little bit. Elevator, though, you need a decent amount of elevator to get it off the ground. So what we're doing here is we're kind of getting things organized and cleaned up. Now with the plane on the ground and no batteries in the nose, we need the big hunk of batteries in the nose for weight. We've got our light plugged into our brake channel right now, just temporarily, and that's for our light controller. So we're out of channels on the CB300, so we've used all of the channels or ports. But of course, we've got more channels on our radio to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the SE6 expander harness, or expander thing plus the harness, to get more channels. Now, all we need is one more channel, but this allows for any future expansion and the ability to really do whatever we need. So what we need to do with this is we need to set this up with JettyBox.